April 1945. In a shadowy pine forest of eastern Germany, a colossal war machine waits in eerie silence. The air is thick with the smoke of a collapsing Reich, and distant artillery thunder edges closer. On a secluded railway spur near Auerbach, the Schwerer Gustav railway gun, once the pride of Hitler's siege arsenal, looms motionless on twin tracks. Its barrel, nearly 30 meters long, points aimlessly at a gray spring sky as if in futile defiance. Exhausted German crewmen swarm over the behemoth's steel carcass like ants, hastily packing its breech and vital parts with demolition charges. They have orders to do the unthinkable, destroy their own monstrous creation rather than let it fall into enemy hands. These soldiers work with grim resolve, lanterns casting flickering light on 1,350 tons of cold steel that once symbolized the Third Reich's invincibility. Each man knows this night's work is a kind of funeral rite, a last service to a weapon born of grand ambition now condemned by looming defeat. Nearby, a train engine hisses impatiently, ready to haul the crew to safety once their task is done. In the still before dawn, a blinding flash and deafening blast tear through the forest. When the smoke clears, the world's largest gun is nothing but a twisted mass of scorched metal. But why did the very army that worshipped this steel god end up signing its death warrant? To understand the ignominious end of the Schwerer Gustav, we have to look back at the moment when this 350-ton monster first made the earth itself tremble. On the Eastern Front in 1942, the Schwerer Gustav artillery piece towers over the landscape as it prepares to fire. The 80 centimeters railway gun, the largest caliber weapon ever used in combat, required extraordinary resources and engineering to operate. Its fully assembled weight was about 1,350 metric tons, and it could hurl 7-ton shells up to 47 kilometers. Over 2,500 men were needed to lay special double tracks and prepare its firing site, and 250 engineers took 54 hours to assemble the gun for action. 2 entire flak battalions shielded it from air attack, underscoring its immense value and vulnerability as a target. Schwerer Gustav was conceived in the late 1930s at the Krupp Works in Essen as an 800 mm siege gun for smashing the French Maginot Line fortresses. By 1941, it was complete. A 47-meter-long Leviathan requiring 2 parallel railway tracks to support its bulk. In June 1942, after Germany turned its might east, Gustav was deployed against Soviet forces in the siege of Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. There, this massive artillery piece finally roared in anger. Each thunderous shot shook the earth and sent a shell the weight of a fully loaded truck arcing into the sky. In one legendary strike, the gun's 800 mm round penetrated 30 meters of rock and ocean to obliterate an underground ammunition depot beneath Sevastopol's harbor, a feat of destruction almost beyond imagination. Observers watched in astonishment as a single 7-ton projectile burrowed under the bay and erupted in a mushroom of flame, detonating the buried magazines. Yet for all its pyrotechnic fury, Schwerer Gustav's impact on the battlefield was largely psychological and symbolic. Its shells, fired at a glacial rate of roughly 14 per day, delivered devastation, but the Red Armée's will did not break. Soviet defenders fell to infantry and bombing as much as to this supergun's wrath. Nazi propaganda hailed Gustav's siege performance, but some German generals privately dismissed the weapon as a prestige project, a steel fist for Hitler's ego. Impressive to behold, yet impractical amid the fluid reality of modern war, the gun's enormous appetite for manpower and logistics made it a lumbering white elephant. Indeed, when Sevastopol fell in July 1942, Gustav had fired fewer than 50 shells in combat, and the Wehrmacht gained little that smaller artillery couldn't already achieve. After Sevastopol, Schwerer Gustav never found a truly worthy target again. The gigantic cannon was painstakingly disassembled and shipped north in an attempt to use it against Leningrad in late 1942, but the Soviet advance forced the Germans to withdraw the gun before it ever fired there. By 1943, the heavy artillery unit I-672 that manned Gustav had no active front, to deploy to the tide of war had shifted, and this dinosaur of a weapon risked aerial destruction if exposed. The great gun spent months hidden in woods and rail yards in Poland and eastern Germany, its barrel taken off and overhauled, its crews reduced. In the summer of 1944, as the Wehrmacht struggled desperately on all fronts, the High Command even considered turning Schwerer Gustav on the Warsaw Uprising. There are accounts that by August 1944, the weapon was reassembled west of the city. Some reports claim it hurled 30 enormous shells into Warsaw during the doomed uprising. If true, those rounds would be its final shots in war, a last brutal use of Hitler's biggest gun against a European capital. However, other historians doubt this episode, suggesting the Gustav was never fully prepared in time to fire on Warsaw. In either case, by late 1944, the advancing Soviets made the gun's position untenable. The order came to retreat once more. Disassembled into segments, Schwerer Gustav was hauled west into Germany proper, destined never to fire another round. Its presence had become a liability. What had once been a showcase of Nazi technological might was now essentially a 7 million Reichsmark albatross, more useful to inspire enemy bombing raids than to change the course of battle. And so in April 1945, with the Theodrichs in its death throes, Schwerer Gustav reached the end of the line. The giant gun had been moved to a forested area in Saxony, near the town of Auerbach, for final hiding. American armored units were thrusting into central Germany from the west even as Soviet armies closed in from the east. Gustav's custodians, a mix of railway engineers, artillerymen, and fortification troops, received strict orders: scuttle the gun and deny it to the enemy. They knew the Red Armee especially would relish capturing such a trophy of German engineering, and Hitler would not allow his prized cannon to become a Soviet spoil. So under the dim forest canopy, the crew feverishly set about sabotaging the weapon. They removed or blew apart critical components. The mighty 800mm breech block was cracked open with explosives, the recoil mechanisms wrecked, and cutting torches taken to the barrels and cradle. As night fell on April 14, 1945, these men planted timed charges at key structural points and bid a hasty retreat. Just one day later, on April 15th, U.S. troops of the 90th Infantry Division cautiously entered the area, too late to save the gun. They found only smoking ruins, twisted steel girders, fragments of the barrel strewn along the twin rails, and the shattered carriage lying on its side in the pine needles. The word Heater, Guardian, could be seen stenciled on a broken carriage section, as if naming the silent forest sentinel that Gustav had become. American DCIs walked the length of the wreckage in amazement, dwarfed by the remnants of a weapon larger than any artillery they had ever encountered. One soldier clambered atop the massive circular cradle, taller than a house even in ruin, and posed for a photograph, hands on hips, a tiny figure against the gun's enormous trunnion ring. It was clear the Germans had tried to destroy both Gustav and any technical blueprints or manuals. Only debris remained. Within days, however, the fate of Gustav's wreck took another turn. The area of Saxony where the gun lay was scheduled to fall under Soviet control as Allied forces redrew occupation zones. American units soon withdrew westward, and the responsibility for Schwerer Gustav's ghost passed to the Red Armee. In summer 1945, Soviet ordnance experts arrived at the Auerbach site to examine what was left of Hitler's supergun. The war was over, but a new tension, the Cold War, already loomed, and anything of technological value was of intense interest. Teams of Soviet engineers and artillery specialists picked over the remains of Schwerer Gustav. They sketched the construction of the enormous breech and rifled barrel and gathered up surviving components for transport. By autumn 1945, the Soviets had loaded the largest pieces onto rail cars and moved them to a depot in Merseburg in the Soviet occupation zone of Germany. Merseburg became a collection point for captured German heavy weapons, and Gustav's hulking fragments joined a yard full of dismantled V-2 rockets, jet parts, and other Wunderwaffe. For a brief time, the world's biggest gun was the subject of intense study behind barbed wire. But then, like a fading echo, Schwerer Gustav disappeared from the pages of history. After 1945, no public record of the gun's final disposition was ever released by Soviet authorities. It's believed that once the Radarmay had gleaned what it could from the design, the remains of Gustav were quietly scrapped, melted down in some Ukrainian or URL steel mill, along with countless other remnants of Hitler's war. Some whispered that the Soviets had secretly spirited Gustav's intact barrel back to Russia, intending to reverse engineer the technology or even put the colossal gun on display as a trophy, but no concrete evidence of such a capture ever surfaced. In truth, the simplest explanation appears to be the most likely. The Soviets, facing their own practical realities, dismantled and scrapped Gustav's remains, just as the Germans had intended. The saga of Schwerer Gustav's final fate would not be complete without acknowledging its equally ill-starred sister and the epilogue of Germany's supergun dreams. A second 80 cm gun, officially named Dore, had been built by Krupp following Gustav. Though nearly identical in size and power, Dore saw even less action. It was briefly tested and earmarked for use at Stalingrad, but was withdrawn before firing in combat. As the Rex crumbled, Dore was stationed in Bavaria. In March 1945, it was moved to the Grafenwehr training area in southern Germany, far from the front. There, on the 19th of April 1945, just days after Gustav's destruction, German troops blew up Dore as well, again to prevent Allied capture. American forces later found Dore's wreckage at Grafenwehr, the long barrel broken and the mighty cradle shattered. The U.S. Army scrapped what was left of Dore in the years after the war, cutting up and melting down even its massive fragments by 1950. Neither of Hitler's gigantic guns would survive to see the post-war world. As for a third gun that had been under construction, a projected ultra-long-range Langer Gustav, it never left the factory floor. Allied troops discovered partial components of an unfinished 80 cm gun at the Krupp Works in Essen in 1945. Those pieces, never assembled into a working weapon, are among the scant tangible relics of the supergun program. Today, a few of these parts, steel segments, and a cradle from the abandoned third gun reside in the Bundeswehr Military History Museum in Dresden, where they stand mute and inert, a curious footnote to the Age of Giants. The Imperial War Museum in London, for instance, preserves one of Gustav's enormous unexploded projectiles, a thick steel cylinder taller than a man, which visitors gaze upon in disbelief. It serves as a stark reminder of the extremes of military engineering that the Second World War provoked.